Imagine the sound of a plastic gear snapping deep inside your transmission at 6:15 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. It's a sharp, clinical sound. It's the sound of a life unraveling. You're sitting in traffic on the I-95. Your engine light just turned a malevolent shade of amber, and you know, before you even check your banking app, that you are finished. You have $42 in your checking account and a credit card that's screaming at its limit. This isn't just a mechanical failure. In the world of financial forensics, we call this a micro-catastrophe. It's the first domino in a systemic collapse. If you can't get to work, you don't get paid. If you don't get paid, the rent check bounces. If the rent check bounces, your credit score, that arbitrary number that governs your existence, plummets. What you are one bad Tuesday away from a total blackout. This is the reality for 60% of Americans, and it's not an accident. It's a design feature of the modern economy. Before we dissect the math of this trap and show you how to build a structural shield, you need to understand the forces working against your liquidity. If you want to see the ledger for what it really is, subscribe to the channel Bond Money Mind. We don't look at the surface, we look at the bone. Let's perform a forensic audit on a standard American life. We'll call our subject Subject A. Subject A earns $65,000 a year. On paper, that sounds like the middle-class dream. But let's run the recursive subtraction. We start with the gross revenue, $65,000. Immediately, the federal government extracts its pound of flesh. After federal income tax and FICA, you're looking at roughly $52,000. But we're not done. State taxes in a place like New Jersey or California will shave off another $3,000 to $4,000. Now you're at $48,000. That's $4,000 a month. Now let's look at the fixed operating costs. Average rent for a one-bedroom in a metropolitan area is $1,800. Utilities, internet, and a basic phone plan add another $300. We're down to $1,900. Subject A needs a car to get to that $65,000 job. The average new car payment is now over $700, but let's be conservative and say, Subject A drives a used sedan for $450, plus another $150 for insurance and $100 for gas. We are left with $1,200. Share $1,200 for 30 days of life. That's $40 a day. But we haven't factored in the invisible leaks. These are the systemic frictions designed to bleed you white. There's the $4 convenience fee for paying your rent online. There's the $15 subscription for a streaming service you're too tired to watch. There's the stress tax, the $25 you spend on DoorDash because you worked a 10-hour shift and your brain doesn't have the glucose left to chop a vegetable. After food, basic hygiene, and the occasional unavoidable expense, Subject A is left with a monthly net margin of maybe $200. This is the financial red line. At this margin, you are not a free agent. You are a debt-servicing utility. The system loves you at the red line. Why? Because a human being with a $200 margin is a compliant human being. This is the incentive mismatch. Your employer's incentive is to keep you productive. The bank's incentive is to keep you borrowing. The landlord's incentive is to keep you paying. None of these players have an incentive for you to have $10,000 sitting in a liquid account. If you have $10,000, you are dangerous. If you have $10,000, you can look at a toxic manager, the kind who asks you to hop on a quick call at 8 p.m. on a Saturday, and you can say no. Most people talk about a $10,000 emergency fund in terms of interest rates. They'll tell you to put it in a high-yield savings account to earn 4 or 5%. They'll say, Bond, well, why should I keep $10,000 in cash when the S&P 500 returns 10%. They are looking at the wrong ledger. They are calculating the ROI of the money, but they are ignoring the ROI of the psychology. In forensic terms, that $10,000 is not an investment asset. It is a decoupling mechanism. It is the price of your ability to walk away. Think about the no. The no is the most expensive word in the English language. To say no to a bad job, a bad relationship, or a bad deal, you must have the liquidity to cover the transition period. If your monthly expenses are $3,000, $10,000 represents 90 days of pure, unadulterated sovereignty. It is 90 days where nobody owns your time. When you have that shield, your internal chemistry changes. Your cortisol levels drop, and your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning, starts to come back online. When you are living at the red line, you are in a state of constant survival brain. You make short-term, high-cost decisions because you have no choice. You take the high-interest payday loan because the car needs to move now. You accept the verbal abuse from the boss because the rent is due on Friday. The real ROI of $10,000 isn't the $400 in interest you get from the bank. The real ROI is at the $3,000 you don't spend on stress-related healthcare. It's the $5,000 you don't lose by being forced to accept a suboptimal job offer because you're desperate. It's the leverage you gain in every negotiation because you aren't hungry. In any negotiation, the person who needs the deal less has the upper hand. $10,000 makes you the person who needs the deal less. But getting to that $10,000 is a forensic battle. You are fighting against a systemic trap that is optimized to keep your margin at zero. The economy is a heat engine, and your labor is the fuel. The system is designed to extract that fuel as efficiently as possible, leaving you with just enough cooling to return to work the next day. Every advertisement, every buy now, pay later button, every subscription model is a cooling fin designed to radiate your wealth away from you. To break the cycle, we have to stop looking at our bank accounts as a reflection of our wealth and start looking at them as a reflection of our autonomy. We need to calculate the cost of compliance. How much is it costing you to stay in a position where you cannot say no? If you're earning $70,000 but spending $69,000 to maintain the lifestyle required to earn that $70,000, your actual profit is $1,000. You are a high-revenue, low-profit business on the verge of bankruptcy. We need to widen that gap. We need to find the forensic leaks and plug them, not so we can buy more stuff, but so we can buy the only commodity that actually matters, the power to choose our own direction. We are going to break down exactly how the system hides these costs in Part 2, but for now, look at your balance. Is it a number, or is it a shield? If it's not a shield, you are currently unarmed in a very dangerous environment. Let's look at the forensic breakdown of a standard corporate hostage situation. We often discuss return on investment in terms of annual percentages or compound growth, but the real return on liquidity is the avoidance of systemic exploitation. To understand this, we have to perform a recursive subtraction on the average American life. Consider a mid-career professional earning $75,000. On paper, this is a success. In the forensic ledger, however, this individual is often a high-maintenance asset with zero structural integrity. We start with the gross. Subtract 24% for federal and state obligations. Subtract 7.65% for the social safety net you may never fully collect. You are left with roughly $51,000. Now, we apply the compliance overhead. This is the hidden tax of being an employee. It includes the commute, the professional wardrobe, the elevated cost of housing near a job center, and the convenience meals purchased because the job has extracted every ounce of your cognitive energy. For most, this overhead consumes an additional $15,000 of net income. What remains is a razor-thin margin of $36,000 to cover housing, debt, and survival. This is the systemic trap. When your margin is this thin, your employer doesn't just own your labor, they own your agency. This is an incentive mismatch of the highest order. The corporation requires a predictable, compliant workforce to ensure quarterly stability. The most predictable employee is one with high debt and low liquidity. And if you have $0 in the bank, you are a captive participant in whatever toxic culture the firm provides. You cannot afford to have an opinion. You cannot afford to point out a systemic failure. You cannot afford to say no to a manager who views your personal time as a free resource. This lack of liquidity acts as a physical restraint, a digital shackle that keeps you tethered to a desk you despise. Now, let's introduce the $10,000 buffer. In the eyes of a traditional financial advisor, $10,000 is a pittance. It's a rounding error in a retirement portfolio. But in the forensic audit of power, $10,000 is a decoupling asset. It represents roughly 4 to 6 months of absolute survival. Those 6 months are a structural firewall. Or they change the fundamental math of every interaction you have with the hierarchy. When you possess that buffer, the threat of termination, the primary tool of corporate leverage, loses its lethality. The power dynamic shifts from a master-servant relationship to a peer-to-peer contract. If the terms of that contract become predatory, you have the liquidity to terminate the agreement on your own terms. The ROI on that $10,000 is not the 4 or 5% you might earn in a high-yield savings account. That is the wrong metric. The real ROI is the total value of your autonomy. If you stay in a toxic, high-stress environment for an extra 2 years simply because you cannot afford a 60-day gap in pay, the cost is catastrophic. But we have to calculate the depreciation of the self. Chronic stress from a toxic workplace leads to systemic health failures, sleep deprivation, and a decline in cognitive performance. If we run the recursive math on stress-induced medical expenses and lost future earnings due to burnout, staying in that job costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars over a decade. Therefore, the $10,000 that allows you to walk away today is actually protecting $250,000 of your future net worth. That is a 2,500% return. No hedge fund in the world can offer you those numbers. Only liquidity can. We must view our savings not as a stagnant pool of capital, but as a defensive weapon. The system wants you to see your bank account as a tool for consumption. I want you to see it as a tool for negation. Now, the ability to say no is the most expensive commodity in the American market. It is the only thing the system cannot easily price, which is why the architecture of our economy is designed to keep it out of your reach. Look at the debt anchor. For every dollar of debt you carry, your psychological leverage decreases by a proportional factor. Debt is a claim on your future labor. It is a pre-sold version of your life. When you are debt-heavy and cash-poor, you are essentially a tenant in your own existence, paying rent to your creditors and your employer simultaneously. This is the ultimate systemic failure. To break it, we don't look for more income first. We look for the extraction points where your current income is being bled away by the convenience economy, the very economy designed to keep you too exhausted to realize you're being harvested. We are looking for the point of maximum leverage, where a small amount of capital creates a massive shift in personal sovereignty. That point, for most, is the $10,000 mark. It is the threshold where the math of survival transforms into the math of freedom. Once you cross that line, you are no longer a hostage to the interest rate or the job market. You are a forensic investigator of your own life, capable of walking away from any deal that doesn't serve your long-term solvency. The system fears a liquid individual because a liquid individual is a person who has regained the power of no. And in a world built on forced compliance, no is the only word that carries a real profit margin. Let's look at the forensic architecture of a yes. When you have zero liquidity, every yes you give to a toxic manager is a debt repayment. You aren't saying yes because the project is high value or because you're a team player. You're saying yes because the alternative is a default on your mortgage, your car note, or your student loans. This is where we see the most aggressive form of systemic leverage. The system doesn't necessarily need you to be poor. It just needs you to be illiquid. There is a massive, quantifiable difference between having a high salary and having $10,000 in unencumbered liquid cash. Let's run the forensic math on the $10,000 threshold. Why 10,000? Because in the current U.S. market context, that is the median cost of a 3-month survival bridge for a single-income household. And this includes health insurance COBRA payments, rent, utility baselines, and basic caloric intake. When you hit that number, the math of your life changes from defensive survival to offensive negotiation. Let's break down the recursive subtraction that keeps you from hitting that $10,000 mark. Imagine you earn a performance bonus of $5,000. The IRS immediately takes 22% for federal withholding. Then you have Social Security at 6.2% and Medicare at 1.45%. If you live in a state like California, New York, or Massachusetts, subtract another 6 to 9% for state taxes. You are left with roughly $3,000. But the system has already anticipated this influx of capital. This is the incentive mismatch. That your car insurance premium rises by 12% due to inflationary adjustments. Your landlord sees the local market heating up and raises your rent by $200 a month. Your energy bill increases because the grid is failing and the utility company is passing the infrastructure cost onto the consumer. By the time you look at your bank account, that $5,000 bonus has been mathematically liquidated before you could even move it to a high-yield savings account. The system thrives on your near-miss status. If you have $900 in the bank, you are desperate. If you have $9,000, you are dangerous. To the corporate structure, a dangerous employee is one who can afford to be honest. A forensic investigation of corporate turnover shows a direct correlation between low employee savings rates and high tolerance for workplace abuse. If the workforce is one missed paycheck away from homelessness, the management doesn't need to lead. They only need to threaten. This is the psychological leverage. The ROI of that $10,000 isn't the 5% interest you're getting from a high-yield savings account. That's a distraction. The real ROI is the ability to look at a supervisor who is demanding unpaid overtime, violating your ethical boundaries, or creating a hostile environment and saying, "No, that doesn't work for me." When you say no, you are executing a transaction. You are buying back your time, your dignity, and your mental health using the liquidity you've protected. But look at how the math works against that protection. We have to account for the cost of compliance. When you are stressed at a toxic job, your spending increases as a physiological response. You buy convenience because you have no time. You buy expensive, processed meals because you're too exhausted to cook. You buy retail therapy to numb the cortisol spikes from your 8 to 6 grind. This is a recursive drain. The job creates the stress that creates the spending that ensures you stay at the job. It is a closed-loop system designed to keep your liquidity at near zero levels. If we strip away the marketing of the American dream, we find a forensic reality. The economy is optimized for the subscription human. You don't own your house, you subscribe to it through a 30-year mortgage. You don't own your car, yet you subscribe to it through a 60-month lease or a high-interest loan. You don't even own your software, your music, or your tools. This ensures a constant, predictable, and mandatory outflow of capital from your pocket. To break this, you have to treat that $10,000 as a defensive fortification. It is not savings. It is a freedom hedge. Let's calculate the escapist tax. If you earn $75,000 a year, your hourly rate is roughly $36. After the recursive subtraction of federal, state, and FICA taxes, your effective take-home pay is closer to $25 an hour. Now, subtract the maintenance of employment costs, the gas, the professional wardrobe, the elevated grocery bill for pre-processed convenience foods, and the mental health costs. But your actual net hourly profit might be as low as $14. To save $10,000 at a profit rate of $14 an hour, you need 714 hours of pure, unadulterated labor. That is nearly 5 months of your life where every single cent earned goes toward that no fund. The system knows this. It knows that 5 months is a long time to remain disciplined while being bombarded by a multi-billion-dollar advertising industry designed to trigger your dopamine receptors and drain your reserves. The incentive mismatch is clear. The bank wants your deposits, the retailer wants your cash, and your boss wants your compliance. None of them want you to have the leverage that $10,000 provides. They want you focused on the interest rate of your savings account, which is a rounding error, or while they ignore the interest rate of your freedom, which is infinite. In the next part, we will look at the specific mechanisms used to trigger impulse liquidation, the moments when the system forces you to spend your hedge just as it starts to become effective. We need to understand why the car breaks down exactly when the savings account hits $5,000, and why the medical bill arrives the moment you think you're ahead. This isn't bad luck. It's a forensic pattern of systemic extraction that we need to dismantle. When we look at the balance sheet of a typical American professional, we see a line item that most traditional accountants completely ignore. It is the cost of silence. In forensic terms, we call this the compliance premium. If you have $0 in liquid assets, you are not an employee in the traditional sense. You are a captive of your own overhead. The system relies on your inability to walk away to maintain its equilibrium. This is where the math of the interest rate fails to capture the true return on investment. You might be obsessed with whether your savings account is yielding 4% or 5%, but that is a distraction designed to keep you looking at the wrong numbers. The real ROI of $10,000 is not found in the interest paid by a bank. It is found in the ability to say no. And let us break down the forensic anatomy of a toxic workplace and why your lack of a cash cushion is a deliberate design choice by the broader economic machine. In the United States, the at-will employment doctrine is the ultimate leverage tool for the employer. It means they can terminate your contract for almost any reason. But the forensic inverse is also true. You can quit. However, the system has built-in friction to prevent that exit. Health insurance is tied to your joachim. Your credit score is tied to your consistent income. Your housing is a monthly liability that requires a steady flow of capital. This creates what I call the liquidity trap of the soul. If you have less than 3 months of expenses, your threshold for tolerating abuse is effectively infinite. You will accept the 11 p.m. emails. You will accept the gaslighting from a manager who takes credit for your work. You will accept stagnant wages while the CEO buys back shares. Why? Because the alternative is a catastrophic failure of your personal financial infrastructure. Now let's apply forensic math to the $10,000 threshold. Suppose your monthly survival cost, rent, utilities, and basic calories, is $3,000. $10,000 is not just a number on a screen. It is 3.3 months of absolute sovereignty. It is 99 days where you do not have to beg for your existence. When you walk into a meeting with a toxic boss and you know you have 3 months of runway, your body language changes. Your vocal tonality shifts. You move from a position of, "Please do not hurt me," to, "I am here by choice." That shift is the most valuable asset you can own. But look at the systemic incentive mismatch. The consumer economy is designed to keep that $10,000 out of your hands through recursive subtraction. Through targeted advertising and the normalization of lifestyle creep, the system encourages you to spend your surplus on depreciating assets. A new car, a bigger apartment. Premium subscriptions. Every dollar you spend on these things is a dollar of leverage you hand back to your employer. They want you in debt because a debtor is a compliant worker. If you owe $50,000 on a truck and $20,000 on credit cards, you are the perfect employee. You will never complain. You will never whistleblow. You will never leave. But we see this in the data. The staying tax is real. People who stay in toxic environments because they lack a no fund suffer from higher cortisol levels, which leads to chronic health issues. Forensically, we must subtract the cost of future medical bills and the loss of career growth from your current salary. If you are making $80,000 a year, but you are too stressed to network or learn new skills, you are actually losing money over a 10-year horizon. The $10,000 is the circuit breaker. It stops the recursive loop of stress spending. When people are miserable at work, they engage in retail therapy, buying things to compensate for their lack of autonomy. This is a forensic leak. You are spending the very money that could buy your freedom on items that reinforce your cage. The system wins twice. Once when you work for them, and again when you spend your paycheck on products owned by their parent companies. To break this, you have to stop looking at $10,000 as savings and start looking at it as a weapon of mass refusal. It is the only financial instrument that pays dividends in dignity. It is not about the compounding interest. It is about the compounding power. When you have that cushion, you can negotiate from a position of strength. You can ask for the raise. You can set boundaries. And if they refuse, you can walk out the door and take your talent elsewhere. That is the real ROI. It is the difference between being a pawn and being a player in the game. The forensic reality is that the most dangerous person in any corporation is the one who does not need the next paycheck to survive. That is the person who can tell the truth. That is the person who can innovate. That is the person who is truly free. If you are sitting there with an empty bank account, you are vulnerable to every whim of a broken system. You are a variable they can manipulate. But the moment you secure that $10,000, you become a constant. You become the one who dictates the terms. This is the psychological leverage that no high-yield savings account can calculate, but it is the most critical metric in your personal audit. We are not just talking about money. We are talking about the price of your agency. And in this market, agency is the only thing worth buying. We have reached the final stage of our forensic audit. Throughout this investigation, we've deconstructed the myth that financial health is merely a collection of percentages and yield curves. It isn't. When we look at the ledger of a human life, the most valuable line item isn't the interest rate on a high-yield savings account or the dividend yield of a blue-chip stock. It is the psychological leverage that liquid capital provides. Let's perform a final recursive subtraction on the concept of the systemic trap. Consider the standard American professional. You are earning $80,000 a year. On paper, you are successful. You are the target demographic for every credit card offer and luxury car lease in the country. But let's apply the forensic lens. Subtract 22% for federal and state taxes. Or subtract 7.65% for FICA. You are left with roughly $56,000. Now, subtract the baseline cost of living in a modern U.S. metro area, rent, utilities, and basic insurance. You are down to $24,000. Now, we subtract what I call the compliance costs. These are the hidden fees of a toxic environment that the system expects you to pay without questioning. You spend $3,000 a year on convenience food because you're too mentally exhausted to cook. You spend $4,000 on a vehicle that you only need to commute to a building you despise. You spend $2,000 on stress relief, vacations you only take to forget the office, or expensive hobbies used to numb the frustration of the work week. Your actual liquid surplus at the end of the fiscal year is perhaps $5,000. In this scenario, the system has achieved a perfect incentive mismatch. Your employer and your creditors know that your margin for error is razor thin. They don't need to own your soul. They just need to own your next 3 months of expenses. This is the compliance tax. Because you have no buffer, you cannot say no to the weekend email that ruins your family dinner. You cannot say no to the unethical shortcut your supervisor suggests. You cannot say no to a manager who treats your dignity as an expendable resource. Your lack of liquidity has turned you into a component in their machine, not an operator of your own life. Now, let's look at the forensic ROI of $10,000. In a traditional brokerage account, that $10,000 might earn you $700 or $800 a year in capital gains. That's the math of a consumer. Sure, but let's look at the forensic math of an investigator. That $10,000 represents roughly 4 to 6 months of absolute survival runway. When you have that runway, the ROI isn't 8%. The ROI is the total value of your agency. When you walk into a performance review with $10,000 in the bank, your entire physiology changes. Your heart rate is lower. Your voice is steadier. You aren't begging for a cost of living adjustment. You are negotiating the terms of your contribution from a position of strength. The forensic reality is that the most expensive thing you can ever own is a life that requires you to say yes to things that destroy you. The system wants you to focus on the interest rate because as long as you are chasing a 0.5% increase in yield, you aren't looking at the exit door. But they want you focused on the how of saving, not the why of repetition. But we know better. We know that every dollar in that buffer fund is a brick in a fortress. That $10,000 is a stop loss order on your mental health. It is the ability to walk away from a toxic contract or a predatory boss without checking the balance on your credit card first. This is the systemic failure of modern financial advice. It treats humans like calculators. It assumes that as long as the net worth is moving up, the person is winning. But if your net worth is moving up while your autonomy is moving down, you are actually in a state of human deficit. You are accumulating capital while losing the capacity to use it for its only true purpose, freedom. Forensically speaking, the FU fund is the only asset class that provides a guaranteed return on dignity. It protects you from the sunk cost fallacy of a dead-end career. It allows you to wait for the right opportunity rather than jumping at the first opportunity out of desperation. In the U.S. market, where health insurance and social safety nets are tied directly to employment, this leverage is not a luxury. It is a survival requirement. If you are currently trapped in the cycle of compliance, your first priority isn't the S&P 500. It isn't a crypto moonshot. It is the acquisition of the know. You must strip away every non-essential expense. You must perform a radical audit of your convenience spending. You must claw back that $10,000 from the system, dollar by dollar, until you own your own time again. The math is cold, but the result is absolute. And you are not a line item in a corporate budget. You are the investigator of your own life. Do not let the system convince you that your value is tied to your productivity under duress. Your value is inherent, but your freedom is purchased with the margin you create. We have closed the file on this investigation. If you want to continue deconstructing the systemic traps of the financial world and reclaiming your psychological leverage, you need to stay informed. To join our network of investigators and ensure you never miss a forensic breakdown of the hidden forces controlling your wealth, subscribe to Bond Money Mind. We don't just look at the numbers, we look at the chains they're meant to hide. This is Bond. Audit your life. Protect your margin. The investigation continues.